What if I told you there was one engine combination so well balanced, so effective, that General Motors themselves tried to keep it in the shadows for decades? The Chevrolet 383 Stroker became an underground legend, perfected by independent builders, while Detroit quietly ignored what many consider the ultimate small block formula. This isn't just a story about horsepower. It's a look into how corporate engineering choices shape the fate of American muscle. The year was 1969, a golden era for performance. GM was promoting their powerful 396 and 427 big blocks, but something unexpected was brewing in local speed shops. Builders discovered that by taking Chevrolet's already proven 350 small block and pairing it with a crankshaft from the 400 small block, they could stretch displacement to 383 cubic inches. This combination quickly earned a reputation for delivering the perfect blend of torque, efficiency, and reliability. It was an engine setup that enthusiasts called the sweet spot for street and strip performance. What many don't realize is that GM engineers were well aware of this potential long before it became popular in the aftermarket. Internal testing in the late 1960s had already confirmed that a 383 could outperform expectations in both power and drivability. But rather than embracing it, GM's marketing and engineering departments quietly shelved the idea. Why? Because a high-performing small block threatened the very foundation of their big block sales strategy. The 383 wasn't just a modification. It exposed the limits GM had deliberately placed on their small blocks to push customers toward larger, more expensive options. The formula was deceptively simple. Start with a 350 block and its 4.00-inch bore, then drop in a 400 crankshaft with a 3.75-inch stroke. The result? A 383 cubic inch powerhouse that could deliver big block torque while maintaining the lighter weight and efficiency of a small block. Independent dyno tests later showed that a properly built 383 stroker could put down between 400 and 500 horsepower with everyday street compression and pump gas. Even more impressive was the torque curve, well over 400 pound-feet from as low as 3,000 RPM, holding strong past 5,500 RPM. For context, GM's factory 396 big block struggled to maintain that same broad range of usable power despite its larger displacement. Fuel economy was another surprise. With the right tuning, 383 strokers were capable of highway mileage in the 18 to 20 mpg range, numbers that rivaled or exceeded stock small blocks while still producing more horsepower. The sweet spot for compression fell between 9.5 to 1 and 10.5 to 1, which meant drivers could stick to premium pump gas rather than expensive racing fuel. Builders also found that the engine could safely spin up to 6,500 RPM with quality internals, something that many heavier big blocks simply couldn't match without reliability concerns. By the mid-1970s, the popularity of the 383 had become a real problem for GM. Independent shops were building them in large numbers, often outperforming and outselling GM's own performance packages. To counter this, GM quietly restricted access to 400 crankshafts, citing efficiency improvements, but in reality limiting the supply for builders. Warranty policies also began targeting stroker conversions, with dealers instructed to deny coverage for any vehicle found running a non-factory displacement combination. It wasn't about durability, it was about maintaining profit margins and keeping the big block hierarchy intact. In short, the 383 stroker wasn't just an aftermarket trick. It was proof that Chevrolet's small blocks had far more untapped potential than GM wanted the public to believe. The builders who championed it revealed how corporate strategy, not engineering limits, determined what made it into showrooms. The conspiracy surrounding the 383 stroker only grew deeper as General Motors began manipulating its relationship with parts suppliers. Aftermarket companies were pressured to downplay or even abandon their stroker kits, with GM threatening to cut off access to other factory performance parts if they didn't comply. Several major manufacturers had no choice but to discontinue their 383 programs or risk losing their entire business connection with Chevrolet. To make matters worse, GM issued technical bulletins to dealerships that deliberately spread misleading information. Mechanics were told that stroker builds were unreliable, prone to catastrophic failure, and even illegal under emissions laws, claims that internal tests had already proven false. By the early 1980s, GM had successfully sidelined the 383 stroker through calculated market manipulation, replacing simple, affordable power with complicated factory performance packages designed to maximize profit while delivering less real-world performance. But the grassroots community kept the 383 alive, and the results were too big to ignore. Between 1970 and 1985, strokers quietly dominated drag strips, circle tracks, and street races across the country. At local drag strips, budget-built 383-powered cars were running consistent 11-second quarter miles on pump gas and street tires, embarrassing factory big blocks that cost twice as much and required race fuel to achieve similar results. On oval tracks, the story was the same. The lighter rotating assembly and balanced torque curve of the stroker allowed racers to outlast and outperform heavier big blocks, which often suffered failures under the stress of competition. In fact, some tracks were forced to create separate racing classes just to keep 383-powered cars from sweeping every event. Official records, however, tell a different story. Many stroker wins were mysteriously reclassified years later as modified or experimental class victories instead of stock eliminator wins. This revisionist history conveniently downplayed just how dominant the 383 had become. Meanwhile, on the streets, its reputation was unshakable. From coast to coast, grassroots racers were proving that a home-built 383 could take down factory supercars and purpose-built drag machines. These victories were rarely documented, but they became part of underground car culture and folklore. The suppression didn't end at the racetrack. It extended into the collector market as well. Despite being one of the most effective and affordable engine combinations in hot rodding history, 383 strokers remain undervalued compared to factory big blocks. A genuine period-built stroker from the 1970s or 1980s can fetch $15,000 to $25,000 in running condition, while original 396 or 427 engines regularly bring $30,000 to $50,000 at auctions. The performance advantage of the 383 was never reflected in its value because GM's decades of marketing convinced collectors to prize rarity and factory authenticity over actual capability. Restoration experts even admit, off the record, that many supposedly original big block cars on the market today are powered by reproduction engines, while genuine 383 strokers are irreplaceable pieces of grassroots history that can't be replicated, especially since GM restricted the availability of the 400 small block crankshaft that made them possible. What makes the early strokers especially valuable is the metallurgy of the original 400 crankshafts. These factory parts were stronger and better balanced than many modern reproductions, giving period-built engines a level of reliability that modern parts often fail to match. Yet, the collector car media rarely highlights this truth. Auction houses and magazines remain financially tied to GM through advertising revenue, so they continue to promote factory big blocks over grassroots stroker builds, maintaining the artificial hierarchy established decades ago. Now, let's compare past to present. Modern Chevrolet engines like the LT2 and today's Corvette make impressive numbers. 495 horsepower from 376 cubic inches. But look at what it takes to get there. Direct injection, variable valve timing, advanced computer controls, and complex emission systems are all required, and the engine still needs premium fuel. By contrast, a 1970s 383 stroker could achieve 400 to 500 horsepower on pump gas using a carburetor and distributor ignition system, no electronics, no proprietary sensors, and no dealership dependency. The stroker could be built and rebuilt in a garage with basic hand tools, something that simply isn't possible with today's LS and LT series engines. This is where the planned obsolescence becomes clear. Modern GM engines are deliberately engineered with sealed components, electronic dependencies, and proprietary systems that tie owners to dealerships for service and parts. GM could easily produce a modern 383 stroker variant within the LS or LT architecture, but doing so would undercut their larger, more expensive engines and threaten their long-term profit strategy. Instead, aftermarket builders are boxed in by strict EPA enforcement, warranty voiding, and limited parts availability that make building a modern equivalent more difficult than it was 40 years ago. Yet, despite all this, independent testing continues to prove that a properly built 383 stroker outperforms many current production engines where it matters most: real-world driving. Better torque, strong horsepower, solid reliability, and even competitive fuel economy.
all achieved without complex electronics. That's the uncomfortable truth GM doesn't want enthusiasts to know.